Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to another video. My name is Abbie and this is Spend More Time in the Wild, a channel, a platform, a community entirely dedicated to inspiring and empowering people to get outside for the benefit of mental and physical health whilst giving back to the natural world in order to cultivate a sense of meaning and purpose. I am sitting here in the garden of the lovely bed and breakfast where I've been staying here at Conca. Conca is a small village at the end of the GR20 here on the island of Corsica, owned by France, part of France. The GR20 is said to be the hardest trail in Europe, 180 kilometres, and I freaking did it. I did it. I did the GR20, people. My gosh, this has been an epic journey. Pretty much everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. I've had equipment failures, I've had sickness and gastrobugness, I've had injury, we've had huge storms that have flooded the refuges, broken tents, washed away tents, we've yada yada, the list goes on. If you want to get a sense of the turbulent journey this has been, then I definitely recommend watching the documentary film that I have created off the back of my adventure. But the purpose of this video is to offer some insight into the things that I've learned along the way that could potentially make your GR20 journey that little bit easier. And my goal is to break this video down into two halves, because there are only two halves in a whole. Maths. First half is things to know before you go, and the second half is things to bear in mind when you're on the trail. Now, this is obviously all completely subjective based upon my journey. You can take and flex and mold this information to be applicable to your journey, the season that you're doing it in, whether you're doing the north or south, whether you're pushing hard, whether you're going easy. So without further ado, let's just jump into this. There's no particular order in which I'm listing the things in these two halves. It's just take the information, make some notes, digest, rewatch, and yeah, hopefully this is helpful for you all. So the first thing within the before you go section is essentially kit. So I've got a list of things here that I really think are worth considering carrying. So the GR20, hardest trail in Europe, it's particularly difficult in my opinion, yes, because of the terrain, the north especially. So you go from Calanzana to Vizzavona. I don't know the length distance of that particular stretch, but you know, you've got gullies, you've got scrambles, you've got climbs, you've got cables, you've got really flat, slippery rocks, which are, when they're wet, really quite dangerous. You don't want to be doing a load of this stuff in storms or icy conditions. You're at over 2,000 meters at various points. You've got 15, 17, 1800 meters of elevation almost every single day. Like, it's tough terrain, but the second half of what makes each day really tough, or at least in my opinion and my experience, is the weather. You know, we are in mountainous country here, and Corsica especially is well known for its thunderstorms, thunder and lightning storms that come in almost every single afternoon around 2 p.m. You can almost set your clock by it. And that particularly for me has caused a lot of stress and angst and fast-paced walking. So the equipment that I'm here to talk about may or may not make your life easier in these two situations, but the number one thing to bear in mind with this trail and the technicality and the challenge of this trail is the weight of the rucksack on your back. Keep that weight as low as you possibly can. I do not, under any circumstances, recommend carrying 18 kilograms like I did, because it almost killed me on a number of occasions, not just from like the sheer exertion, but the severe challenge of having that weight on my back when I'm literally clanging to a rock face with a 1,000-meter drop below me. Not recommended at all. So tip number one is just keep your pack weight down. Now, I know this is applicable to almost every trail, because the lower the weight of your pack, the more likely you're going to be having a slightly more comfortable experience. But here especially, not just for comfort, but for safety, keeping that pack weight down is an absolute priority. That being said, I'm now going to list a load of stuff you can put in your pack that might be super great to have along. So the first thing I want to mention is when it comes to accommodation on the GR20, it is illegal to wild camp, or forbidden. And to be honest, I really would not recommend even contemplating it. First of all, for the sort of ecological reasons. You know, more and more people are trying to push out, doing trails, trying to wild camp. And if we're breaking those rules, we're going to be camping in ecologically fragile environments, causing damage, because it's not just me, it's not just you, it's then all the other people that follow in those footsteps and who have gone before. So that's the first reason why I think it's really worth sticking to that rule. And the second, there is really not a lot of running water here or flowing water, and the ground is just extraordinarily sheer and rugged. When you arrive at the refuges at roughly the end of every single day, each stage, you kind of go, who built a refuge here? Like, huh? It makes no sense, but only pure sense because people are on the GR20. So what you can do is you've got 3 options for accommodation almost at the end of every single day. In general, the refuges where you will finish, you have a dormitory, which are either really big dormitories of up to 32 beds, or you have dormitories which are smaller rooms of 4 to 6 people in one room, and then there's lots of different rooms. These are generally mixed dormitories, mixed gender dormitories, which for me is super great. I really like that. So that's option 1. Option 2 is you can hire a tent. So most of the dormitories have 2-second pop-up tents, which you can hire. They're around, at least this year, 18 euros. I think the cheapest I paid was 12.5 euros. And they're designed for 2 people. They usually come with 2 quite rubbish mattresses that you can lie on. And then you've got the tent. And the third option is you carry your own tent. So my initial instinct off the back of my experience, which in some senses was like mildly traumatic, bring your own tent. If you can carry it within the list of everything else you're carrying, having your own tent is going to mean you don't need to stress out about reservations and booking ahead, because you can always find somewhere to pitch around the refuges and they will always let you camp. So one of the stresses I had is I got really sick on this trail, and we'll come to that in a little bit. But basically, the stress of that wasn't so much that I was unwell and trying to get on and off the trail. It was that I had to keep up with the reservations that I had booked in advance for the accommodation, because I had dormitories that I was staying in. Now, more often than not, I did ask at the dormitories if I could stay in one of the higher tents, because that just meant I had some privacy and I was sort of outdoors under the incredible sky that is visible out here in the mountains of Corsica. But, you know, if I had my own tent, I wouldn't have had to worry so much about those reservations. On the other hand, or the other side of that, carrying your own tent is heavy, and also it's actually more expensive to pay to stay in your own tent than to hire a tent. My personal opinion as to why that is because the storms that come through and rampage the mountains and the refuges, more often than not, ended up flooding, washing away, or damaging the higher tents. And that's where I sort of hint at the mildly traumatic side. We had some huge hailstorms that came down, the campsites completely flooded, the refuges flooded, just like holes literally punctured through the tents. Now obviously I am here towards the second half or the end of the season, hiking season here on the GR20, so these 2-second pop-up tents have been out for a while. But yeah, it's a bit of a gamble, or it has been a bit of a gamble, as to whether to stay in the dormitory and sort of subject myself to snoring people and sort of the complications that come with the dormitory, like potentially bed bugs, not being able to take your kit inside, yada yada, having a higher tent that may flood, wash away, or get punctured by hailstones, or having your own tent, which costs more, gives you more flexibility, but then also usually you're pitching somewhere that is going to end up also flooded in the storms. So yeah, that's that. So this is obviously inching into sort of things to bear in mind on the trail, but a tent is just that first thing I wanted to mention. If you have a really nice light tent that you could almost have as a backup or use on days where the weather is looking clear or you just need that flexibility, I genuinely think that's a really good idea. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of shelter before you go. The next thing I would really recommend is sort of also to do with camp setup. I brought a stove and a pot, and I brought a couple of sachets of like couscous and just some instant meals that I could eat along the way in case I struggled to find some food. And I suppose this is sort of my next subject, it is food. I'm a vegetarian, and I actually found it really hard to be nutritionally efficient and eat good food on the trail. More often than not, the evening meals which were served at the refuges had meat in them. One night I literally was just served rice and bread, which obviously I paid for the same amount as the people getting meat, which was a little bit frustrating. But also the little shops at the refuges, there's lots of cans of tuna and sort of sausages and ravioli with some animal in it. But to be vegetarian, I actually found very difficult. So after I got sick and then recovered and then had an appetite, I literally was just inhaling Corsican cheese just to get some calories in my system. But I would suggest packing a stove with a small canister of gas so you can make your own food, especially if you're vegetarian or you like coffee and you don't want to leave your tent in the morning before you drink coffee. But also packing some food that's just going to support you on your sort of nutritional scale through potentially 2 weeks to 16 days of walking, depending on how fast or slow you're taking this trail. And I think the last thing I'd say sort of to the food and nutrition is electrolytes. You know, you're going to sweat freaking buckets out here. Even on the day where it's cool, you know, with the wind and the clouds, you know, you're just pushing yourself so hard with the physical exertion. Having electrolytes to replace some of the salts and the minerals that you're losing, I think is really just going to help sustain you that little bit longer. So I had 2 electrolytes every single day, which obviously is quite a weight carrying all of those tablets, but they definitely helped sort of keep me hydrated on the hydration scale. So yeah, well worth bringing some electrolytes as well. Okay, the last few things that I want to mention with regards to stuff to pack is one of the questions people have very frequently is, can I charge my phone or my electronics along the trail? Yes, in general you can. Some of the refuges are literally tents only, and if you're really in a bit of a sticky situation, the staff will allow you to charge your phone. Some of them have sockets that are everywhere and everybody just plugs their stuff in. Some of them you have to pay €2 to get your stuff charged. But in general, I would say very safely you could charge every other day, no problem. It might cost you something, you might have to wait your turn to get to a socket. But my tip here, and it's something I've done for years now, is I carry a worldwide adapter. So it's got lots of different adapters in it. So you push it and it comes out, whatever. So I've got the EU adapter within this, I plug it in. But what's really cool is this adapter has 4 USB sockets, 1 USB socket. USB-C, socket. So there's 5 sockets in total. And what that means is you're only taking up 1 socket space in the refuge, but I can get everything charged. I can get like my phone, my satellite communicator, my camera batteries, my earphones, everything I can get charged all at once. And it's just really great because it means you're not stressing out then about, oh, my power bank is running low and yada yada. You can get everything charged when you get the opportunity to do so. Obviously you're carrying a little bit more weight than like a tiny USB socket plug thing, but if you are somebody who has a lot of electronics and use them quite heavily on the trail, that's just a really cool tip that I would suggest for you. And then the last couple of things I want to mention sort of before you go, on the subject of before you go, is, you know, first of all, it's true. Most of the refuges only take cash because there is no service, so they can't have a card reader. So I actually brought €1,000 of cash. I haven't spent it all, but I did not want to be one of those people that gets knocked off the trail because they didn't have enough cash. And the very simple truth is, I met people who had to come off the trail because they did not have enough cash to pay for accommodation, to pay for food, to pay for the things that you need to pay for on the way. It's not a cheap trail. You know, a little can of Coke is roughly €4, sometimes $4.50, just to give you some context. So it's pretty much, you can take a normal price of something and double it. Actually, the only thing I'd say that's pretty fair price is actually the accommodation. So yeah, make sure you've got enough cash. And then for me, I hiked this trail in partnership with Cicerone. This is a legitimate piece of information, but I was worried about this route. I was worried about, okay, if I get injured, if the storms come in, if psychologically I'm just done in, if I get sick, because a week before coming out here, there was a huge wipeout of this gastrointestinal bug virus thing. People were getting sick. Someone had to be heli evacuated out. And I was like, I need to really know my escape routes on this trail. And I'd made a list, but you know when you're not on the trail and you've just got like these names that you can't pronounce and nothing really fills in context, and then you get on the trail and suddenly everything makes sense? Having this Cicerone guidebook was freaking game-changing for me, because not only does it have the route, it has the alternative routes, because sometimes you've got high and low level routes, and you can follow whichever one you want. But it also has link routes, which in my book mean escape routes. So there are ways to get down to some kind of civilization where maybe you can hitchhike, you can get a taxi, you can get a navette, which is these like communal small buses that hikers use, or you can get a bus to somewhere. And I had to use this quite heavily when I became unwell. A couple of times I had to walk off the trail, or I had to get extra links to sort of keep up with my itinerary, as I mentioned earlier. So having this guidebook, if you can read English, or another guidebook with escape routes, I think is actually a very morally responsible thing to do, not just for yourself but for other people, because a couple of times, you know, I supported other folks with looking at this book to help them to get off of the trail. So it's got some weight to it. It also comes with a 1 to 25 map book, so you can literally follow where you are on the map. But I think having something like this is a very good and responsible thing to do when you're on the trail. Know your escape routes, and make sure you've got a plan every single day for what you're going to do if you get caught out in bad weather. And that is something you can do before you even arrive here in Corsica. Okay, so last couple of things to sort of explore on things before you go, or things to think about before you go, is I learned French a lot at school. I went to 5 places of education because I was bullied a lot and I just had to move around. And every single one I sort of went back to the beginning of like learning French. But since then I've started learning German and Italian, and it seems to have completely pushed French out of my head to a startling degree. And I have found it very difficult to get by with the limited amount of French that I know on this trail, and it's actually sort of made it feel quite hostile and lonely at times. So I really suggest that you write down some very basic phrases, like asking about the weather, asking how much food is, asking if you can, if there's space in the dormitory. Think ahead about some things you may want to ask, and some responses that you might get, and yeah, freaking learn some French. It makes life a lot easier, and that again is something you can do before you come out here. I actually have a French guidebook on my phrase book on my phone, which is downloaded offline, so that's been really helpful, sort of referring to that and sort of prepping myself for when I get to the refuge to ask or explore something that I want to ask or explore. So yeah, think ahead with regards to language, and that will make your life a lot easier, because truthfully, most of the staff at the refuges do not speak English. It's the other hikers who have translated for me and helped me to communicate and get the information that I need. So yeah, learn some French. And basically the last thing I want to say when it comes to prepping for the trail is just prep the way you normally would. We've talked about keeping that pack weight down, but you know, make sure you've got your emergency contacts written down in case you need them because your phone breaks or you lose them. If you need a satellite communicator, make sure that's subscribed, charged, ready to go, test it out. All the usual stuff. Get a GPX on your phone so you've got that backup in case you're getting lost and struggling to navigate, which I did on a couple of spots. All the usual stuff. So just prep like normal, don't overthink it, keep it simple, and yeah, get ready for an epic adventure. So now let's transition to life on the trail.
Come to Corsica, they said. It'll be fun, they said.
Alrighty then, so let's dive into this. The first thing I want to start with is, you know, whether you're on the trail for 7 days, 2 weeks, or 16 days, 16 days is the normal amount of time to complete the trail, you're going to find yourself settling into a little bit of a routine. And what that typically looked like for me was setting the alarm at 5 o'clock when it's dark and cold and everybody's like hustling about with head torches on, having some coffee and some breakfast, which usually I made myself. I didn't buy a single breakfast on the trail actually. I didn't think they were good value for money, and I don't need to eat stale bread and jam every day and may or may not get some coffee. I was self-sufficient. I brought coffee for every day, essential, and ate different things along the way for breakfast. Half past six, I was on the trail. Initially I started setting out in the dark, but I very quickly got tired of that. I found my head torch was not particularly strong. I found navigating in the dark actually quite difficult in terms of following the white and red flags or signs that you see on the rocks. I have a astigmatism, I think that's what it's called, and I just found it slow going, and I decided that actually just waiting those 10 extra minutes at camp for the sun to come up, or at least lighten the area, more beneficial. So I always set off around half past six when it was light. The latest day I set off was actually 7:45, but that's because I knew there was an easier day ahead and the weather looked fine. Did the trail, and then depending on the length of the trail, I usually finish sort of between 12 and 2, some later days around 4, and then arriving at camp, it was literally like get to my accommodation, whether it's a hire tent or a dormitory, basically filter as much water as I can, rehydrate, get some good food into my system, usually have a nap. I would send a message on my phone or my satellite communicator, this is my Zoleo device, to let my my loved ones know that I had arrived at camp and survived this, that or the other. And then I'd weather the storm, because almost every single day a huge storm would come in. Then we'd have dinner, and then it would be lights out around 8 p.m, whether you're again in the dormitory or in a tent. Almost everybody is like curled up in their sleeping bag at 8 p.m, ready to go and repeat on the next day. So on that note, you know, it becomes quite rigorous. And one thing I mentioned at the end of the video that I've produced on the GR20 is I thought I'd fallen out of love with this trail at various points, but I realised it wasn't the trail I was falling out of love with, it wasn't the landscape, it wasn't the physicality, it was the mentality. The GR20, in my opinion, in my experience, was less a celebration of hiking and a lot more an endurance event. It was just a grind, a push, a routine that you follow every single day to get the job done and get yourself safely from A to B into the end of the trail. It was almost like a sporting event. And you know, you fall into that and you get caught up in the energy of everybody else around the trail. And I can say that I really didn't have barely any conversations that went any deeper than how far are you going tomorrow, what's the weather doing tomorrow, how's your achy limbs, you know, that is the water safe to drink here. It really was just all consuming, very much like tunnel vision experience. So on that, you know, it's just about pacing it and hiking your own hike, because if you're there to hike for 16 days, make sure you stay focused on your mission, your goal and your experience, and try and take those moments every single day where you do actually stop and look up, because you are constantly, whether it's north or the south, navigating really quite gnarly terrain. You're looking down all the time, you're either scrambling, you're using your poles, you're trying to stay upright, not fall off a cliff. So you do need to stop and look up and breathe and have those appreciation moments. So pace it, hike your own hike, and take those moments to stop, pause, and just rest in the gratitude of the incredibleness of where you are. So that's tip number one. And then off the back of that routine that I mentioned, you know, I talked about starting early and finishing early. So the reason why we get going early on the GR20 is, again, because of the weather. These storms are routine, they can be really intense and actually very dangerous if you get caught out in them. Hence why this was like my biggest motivator and stress to move every single day. Now, some people did go ridiculously early. You know, I personally didn't feel the need to set out at 5 a.m. on any single day. But, you know, the goal was always like calculating, okay, Cicerone or the signs are saying this is a 7-hour day. I'm probably going to do it in 6, maybe 6.5. That means that I finish here. When is the storm due in? Roughly here. Is that accurate? We never know. But we're just going to beast it and get this job done. So starting early and finishing early, and then really making sure when you finish early, you genuinely take the time to rest and step into your personal admin. Look after your feet, hydrate, rest, eat some good food, do some stretching. That's going to really promote the longevity of your muscles and your mindset as well, taking that time just to breathe and get into yourself. So yeah, that's sort of the second thing regarding routine, or 20th thing. I don't know. I told you this is not a numerical system. So yeah, that's really that. And all of that sounds like quite a grind, and it is a grind. And I think sort of the flip side to that is I really just want to say, know your limits. You know, once I got to Vitsavona, which is the rough halfway point where the route is divided into the north and the south, I started meeting a whole load of different people who were walking just the southern part of the trail because it is easier. You know, it's still a pretty extreme height. You've still got you've still got great elevation gain and loss every single day. You've still got scrambles, which many people would find exposing and difficult, but it is different. And what was really nice about that was a lot of these people who were hiking just the southern stretches, they knew that the north was outside of their remit. And I think there's something, in my opinion, really admirable about knowing your limits. So when I was unwell, I hiked off the trail the day after I'd been really sick in the night. I was very weak. I managed to get myself to a hotel. I rested up. The next day I decided to continue up to Refuge Manganu. I continued the day after that for an hour and a half, and then knowing the terrain ahead of me, which was some quite severe erects and scrambles, I decided I was too weak, I was too unstable, so I had to walk all the way back, 8 hours, back to that hotel, so a day and a bit extra, and then travel the next day to keep up with my itinerary via bus and a train, and on it goes. But I knew my limits, and I think there is a great strength in knowing when to say no. So I think really just making sure you do not just get hot-headed and blindsided and that sort of summit fever or trail fever. You're going to do this thing no matter what, because there are always elements outside of our control on the trail, and I think the GR20 especially has a lot of elements outside of our control, from the bugs and sicknesses that float around to the inaccessibility of the route due to the weather conditions, yada yada yada, you know. So you really have to surrender to the GR20 and whatever experience it's going to gift you with, and just be willing to go with the flow. So have some flexibility, and knowing your limits is absolutely essential for the GR20. Okay, a note on a few practical things for the GR20. So, you know, if you're hiking this in the summer season, which you will be because that's when you hike the GR20, it's inaccessible otherwise, you know, you're probably going to be hiking in the sun, particularly the second half of your hike. First hike part is usually in the shade because the sun is coming up, and I was hiking north to south, so the sun just didn't really bother me. But really make sure you are, again, rigorous with your personal care when it comes to sun cream. Protecting your skin from the sun exposure is obviously really essential, and it's just going to help you stay hydrated and well, and enhance your longevity over the length of this hike. So that's one thing I would mention. And the other thing is, you know, trekking poles. I think trekking poles are a really great thing to have. A lot of people decided to skimp on trekking poles, thinking that it really was just climbing the whole way. And absolutely, there are times where you just chuck your trekking poles down in front of you because they're in the way, or you have to put them away, scramble down, get them back out. But they're going to support your knees. I think is it 40 or 60% of the strain they take off each step of your knees, but either way, 40 or 60% is a very great amount. So just supporting our bodies through this endurance experience. So trekking poles, I think, are really worth using, and knowing how to use them. You know, when you're going uphill, what you want to do is you put your left foot forwards and your right foot forwards, and then left foot, right hand, left hand, right foot, you know, if that makes sense, like boom, boom, boom. But that's so hard to do without trekking poles. I think you get the point. Check out my video on how to use trekking poles. That's far more helpful than this is. But yeah, you can really push through. You know, it's nice because you get your upper body moving as well. Yeah, just actually having that little bit of extra push to get you up some of those climbs, which is slightly more walking, I think is a really helpful thing to do. So that's trekking poles. Another good thing I mentioned earlier is I had a really rubbish head torch. It just was not very bright. So having a good head torch if you're setting out in the dim light in the morning is going to help you stay on track and navigate, and not fall off a cliff again. So that's something else. And then I've mentioned charging in the sort of before you set out thing. Do make sure you keep your phone charged. Your phone, wherever possible, is obviously your emergency line. I mean, there's not a lot of signal on the trail necessarily, so that's arguable. For most people, a phone is a camera, but also having that GPS or GPX route, which I really recommend downloading offline before you go, so you can track where you are, is a really helpful thing. So I actually lent my charger to several people. Their phones run out of battery. So yeah, I mean, I'm a filmmaker, I've always got excess power on me, so that was absolutely fine. But making sure everything stays topped up and you're on top of your charging is a really important thing for safety and navigation, I think, as well. Okay, so last thing I would mention with regards to things to use on the trail is an eye mask and earbuds or ear plugs, whatever you call them. So if you're in dormitories, people are going to probably be snoring and lights may be coming on and off around 4:30 in the morning, and having an eye mask just helps mitigate that, and earbuds as well. In the tents, you know, sometimes you've got wind, you've got rain, you've got people shuffling around in other tents, so just being able to protect your sleep is going to obviously just help you to feel better the next day, so that's a really important thing. Some days I did put my earphones in just to listen to some music overnight to try and just keep myself calm and mellow when I was feeling a little bit anxious. Actually, I deliberately on this trip bought Bluetooth earphones because with the scrambling and the constant movement of my arms and my legs, having a cable I thought would be really dangerous and potentially put my phone at risk of falling somewhere on my earbuds from ripping. So I actually deliberately used Bluetooth earphones on this trek when I did need that bit of motivation. It was great because I didn't feel sort of constrained by this cable. So that's another thing to mention. And yeah, you know, I think one of the other admin tasks I talked about is water and filtering water. I don't know if it's food or water or dehydration or fatigue or something else or accumulation of all that made me get really unwell. But, you know, water is a massive problem on this hike in terms of sourcing it from anywhere outside of the refuges. The problem is the refuges, I think, are really quite unhygienic places. So soap is not provided and toilet roll is not provided, and the water, it really does need filtering. You know, sometimes the water would go off at the refuges, so then people couldn't use the toilet, and we just had to basically crap and pee all around where we were sleeping. And then with the storms, that would wash into the water sources, which we'd then be drinking. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's primeval. It's freaking 2024, and it really wound me up because it's like, did anyone else suffer during this COVID thing? You know, we're not providing soap. Am I missing something here? Like, but they don't provide soap, and you do have to crap and pee all around camp. So yes, filter water, filter everything. Don't even second guess it. There was one time I didn't filter water. That's probably what made me sick. Some people were not filtering and they were just lucky. But I actually ended up, when I came off the trail, purchasing some purification tablets as well. My water filter got a puncture in the bladder. It was a very slow process. It was a very frustrating process. So then using the tablets, I had some 2-hour ones and some 30-minute ones. And it just meant that water was hopefully that little bit safer to drink off the back of that. So filter, 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 and stay on top of your hydration. That's really, really key. Sorry about the wind. It's stormy out here, people. Anyway, this is getting to the point of starting to wrap this thing up. You know, I've mentioned a lot of sort of the rigours and strains and challenges of life on the GR20, but I think it's really important that you stay mentally focused on why you're doing this hike. You know, I initially thought that I was doing this hike for a very egotistical reason, which was to just tick off the GR20. I'm a solid, strong hiker. I want to be able to say I've done the GR20, the hardest trek in Europe. But I realised towards the end, after going through everything that I went through, that for me it was a much deeper meaning than that. You know, I always had an end in sight, you know, of the GR20, whether it was 7 days in when I got sick, whether it was 14 days in, 13 days, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's an end in sight. But I was here to do a shoot. I was here to work on a production. I was here to tell a story. And even though I missed 3 days of the trail due to being sick and having to skip things, I feel very grateful for those experiences because I've learned a lot. And one of the mottos I've come away with, excuse the swearing, but a dead hero is a shit hero when it comes to telling a story and the hero's journey. But also, you know, the fact is we're all going through hugely turbulent and challenging times in life, whether it's illness or family bereavement or loss or financial struggles or relationship breakdowns or, you know, whatever it is. And we don't have an end in sight. And for me, the GR20 was the perfect metaphor and situation to put myself in order to transcend and communicate the struggles that we go through in life as people, just inherently, because that's what life is. So that was actually my deeper purpose for pushing through all of the struggles and the angst and the difficulties that I did. And I really hope that that comes across in a motivational and inspirational way in the story that I've created off the back of this hike. So knowing your why, knowing why you're there, staying mentally focused on that, and yet at the same time being willing to adapt. I mentioned earlier, don't get too hot-headed on like, this is how I have to complete my trail, because having that flexibility and that malleability is a really great lesson that we can carry forwards in life on and off the GR20 as well. So that's some thoughts there I've got for you regarding the mentality with which to apply to the GR20. And I think another way of actually implementing that is just talk to people, hike with people, be friendly, smile, laugh, you know, take the strain off when you get to camp, you know, and just let your hair down, so to speak, have fun, enjoy the experience, immerse yourself in it, be open to lessons and learnings. And yeah, I think more than anything, it's a very cool thing to be able to say you've been on the GR20, because so many of these landscapes you really can only access through human-powered endeavour and adventure. And knowing that you have a body that is strong and fit enough to do that is something to really rest in gratitude for, because there's a lot of people who will never be able to see the landscapes that I or you or we have and will be able to see. So I think, you know, gratitude equals joy equals a good life. So yeah, stay grateful and stay humble. I think the last tip I want to mention before I sign off here, even though that was quite a good round off, but basically I forgot this one, is regarding the storms. When I was in these higher tents, I learnt to not unpack my stuff until the storm had passed. So if ever I left my tent, I would have my waterproofs with or on me, and everything would be wrapped up in waterproof covers or plastic bags ready for the storm, just because you didn't know the intensity of what was coming. So just, you know, adapting to the situation and not relying on those higher tents to stay waterproof, I think is a very key thing. But it's also the same if you're in your own tent, because as I've mentioned, a lot of people's tents ended up in a makeshift lake, or ice lake even. And yeah, were flooded, and people's kit and sleeping bags got really wet and ruined. So don't unpack until that storm, if you know one's coming, has passed. So to be honest, folks, I think that's pretty much a wrap. I know that there's a whole bunch of other things that I was thinking about when I was hiking that I didn't write down, and I wish I had, because they're in context, they felt like useful tips. So if there's anything I feel like I've forgotten, they will be displayed in a screen shortly, or on a screen shortly. But if not, then boom, smashed it. Yeah. But I just want to say thank you so much for listening to this. I hope that some of this information has been helpful. It's not just applicable for the GR20. I think planning ahead, making sure safety is key, making sure you've got your mindset sorted out, your kit squared away, is stuff that's really important for every trail and adventure we go on, and indeed for life as well. So yeah, take what's helpful, discard what's not, and hopefully this will help set you up for a freaking epic adventure. The GR20 is tough. There's no two ways of talking about it. It's hard, it's a grind, it's an endurance challenge. But it's through the hard things that we grow, we evolve, and we learn to flourish. We develop self-awareness, and we're gifted with a journey and the story of a lifetime. So enjoy every second, and until next time, stay wild. I'll catch you soon, folks. Remember, believe you can. Get up, get out, and spend more time in the wild. Ah yeah, I'll see you around. I never know how to wrap up these videos. It's always a little bit like, okay, bye, bye, yeah, bye, okay, bye. You know, when you're like on the phone, it's like, bye, yeah, okay, you hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. Yeah. Huh. They hung up on me. See you later.